Welcome to Everything EFL podcast. My name's Erin O'Byrne and I absolutely love sharing my knowledge with you, my darling teacher, and helping you build not only community but your students' confidence. I truly believe that a positive frame of mind is essential for your students to learn. There's also a bunch of other teachy stuff thrown in for good measure too. Are you ready? Let's go! So my guest today is an online teacher trainer who founded TEFL Horizons, which provides resources for English teachers, Shannon Felt. Welcome to Everything EFL.
Thank you so much, Erin, and thank you for having me. I'm happy to be here.
Good. How are you today?
Doing well, thanks. Yeah, it's a nice sunny day in Columbus, Ohio, so it's good. How are you?
Yeah, it's sunny. It's not bad. I mean, it's so changeable here. It could be cloudy in the morning and sunny it was lashing down this morning. Nice and sunny this afternoon. It's typical Irish weather. Okay, so I've brought you on today because we're going to chat about the CELTA a little bit. Now, you are a CELTA teacher.
CELTA trainer, yeah. So not a CELTA certified I am a CELTA certified teacher, but I also train on the CELTA course.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
So can you cast your mind back to when you did your CELTA? What was your experience of it?
So my personal experience on the CELTA course as a CELTA candidate was actually pretty positive. But I realize now, after training so many candidates, that there were some factors at play that helped make it more positive. It definitely felt intense, very, very intense, more so than I expected. I worked all through my college days, right? So I applied for the CELTA fully thinking that I could work as well during the course. And was advised very strongly against that by my interviewer. And so thankfully I took her advice and I didn't keep working during the CELTA. And I realized immediately that there's no way I could have done that. So it was absolutely intense. But I think for me, what was really helpful is that I had graduated with my university degree about a year and a half, 2 years before, and I'd just been working since then. So it was the perfect, I was still sort of fresh out of college, but I'd had a break. So I was ready for a new kind of learning experience. And I also was staying at the time with my dad and my stepmom, who were cooking and cleaning for me. My dad was the type that was focus on your studies, I'll take care of everything else. So I think without those things, if I'd been trying to do anything else in my life, it would have felt way more overwhelming than I was so lucky. I had dinner waiting for me every evening after the course. So that made it a lot more manageable. Yeah.
Yeah, I think you're right. And if anybody's listening, I think a lot of what you said have probably resonated. The word intense, most definitely. I mean, that would be the word I would have chosen as well. I was also living at home with my parents at the time, so it wasn't too bad. But were there any tears?
For me, actually, no. For many of my colleagues on the course, yes. So most of my peers cried at one point or another. I didn't cry on my CELTA. I cried on my Delta. There were tears then. But CELTA, I was okay.
I had one bout on a Saturday evening. I was sitting there. It takes about 17 hours to prepare an hour's lesson, doesn't it, back in the day? Yep. I was trying to prepare something. I was sitting on the floor cutting things out, and we were supposed to all be going out to dinner. And my mum was like, come on, you got 10 minutes, And I was like, I can't do it. I can't go. So everybody got down on the floor and started helping me out. So.
Oh my gosh, that is, it's a very accurate. I think also as a trainer, I've seen so many tears, and I've seen tough, grown 60-year-old men break down crying after a lesson. What is happening to me? And it's no, you're just exhausted. It's an emotionally and physically exhausting experience, especially to do it full time. So much of it is not even the coursework or the stress. It's just the physical and emotional experience of it. You just cry for no reason a lot of the time.
It's a lot. It's a lot.
It's a lot.
So I've been chatting with a couple of friends of mine who are also CELTA trainers, because I'm a teacher trainer, but I'm not qualified to teach CELTA. And they were telling me that now they think it's a little bit different. It's unnecessarily stressful now because of the kind of people that are being accepted. Back in the day, you had to be over 18, you had to have learnt a language, and you had to have a degree. And now all that's gone. So a lot of trainees now are having problems actually coping with the course What do you think about that?
I would say that's pretty accurate. I think the level of intensity and whether or not that's actually necessary has been a topic of discussion among trainers for a long time of like, I understand why it started that way. The intensive version of the course is a month long. It's essentially like a 9 to 5 schedule, but as you well know, there are hours and hours and hours of preparation that go into, before every day on the course. So they estimate that it's about 120 hours, I believe, of like in face-to-face coursework time, but they say that you should plan for an additional 120 hours of work that you're doing outside of the actual class time. So it's a lot. And I understand that started because they wanted to try to make it manageable for people who had a limited amount of time that they could take off work. So 4 weeks is like a stretch for most people, but it's reasonable that you could somehow, find a month, knock it out, and then you're certified. So I get that. That being said, there's still so much that you have to do on the course to do it successfully. It almost becomes like this trial by fire or like rite of passage that, by the end, so many candidates are sort of like, what just happened? Like I did something. I don't really remember anything that I learned because it was so about keeping your head above water rather than actually digesting and like reviewing the things that you're taking in. So yeah, I think for a long time, there's been this question of why are we putting people through this? And I do think that in the past, it was sort of like the gold standard. The application process was much more rigorous, and it was not a guarantee that you would be accepted onto the course after your interview. Like you interview with a trainer, face to face if you're able to, or over the phone, or now over Zoom or something. And it wasn't a guarantee. Like it was like a job interview. It was a stressful thing that I don't know if I'm going to get in or not. I need to have done my homework. But now I think the centers are sort of like, yeah, they want to pay the money. Let them do it.
That's it. Yeah.
And yeah, I've recently had a couple of really unfortunate experiences with candidates who should not have been accepted into the course, and didn't pass. And it was really hard to tell them that they weren't passing, knowing that should have been prevented by the interviewer and the center well in advance, like to sort of protect them from that experience.
Yeah. But you know what, having said that, I completely agree. But on my course many, many years ago, there was a qualified teacher on the course, 25 years teaching experience. She dropped out on the third week.
Yeah.
She just couldn't cope with the differences. She couldn't cope. She couldn't relinquish that control, that kind of,
Exactly.
It's a lot more dictatorial, I think, in mainstream schools, especially like 20 years ago. The teacher was the center of this. She couldn't cope. She just couldn't make that change. So that's very interesting as well.
It is. And it's not uncommon for people to drop. I would say on every course, it's likely that 1 or 2 candidates will drop out.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you think the course should be longer?
I don't know. So yes and no. I understand, again, like it gets tricky. Like there are part-time options. So the center where I did most of my CELTA training, there was the option to do the full-time intensive, so 4 weeks. There was also an option to do a part-time course over 10 weeks, and most centers have that option. So you can make it longer if you want. The issue with that is most people doing that are doing that because they're also working full-time. So the level of intensity in terms of your life and the things that you're trying to manage doesn't really change that much, because you're still putting in all of that work over 10 weeks, but you're also juggling, a full-time job or whatever it is that made you choose the 10 weeks. So it's difficult. I get that they're trying to make it doable for people schedule-wise. I've always said that the best possible way to do the course would be to do the part-time version and not work. But then, who can take 10 weeks off? That's not a lot of people out there who can spend 10 weeks not working and invest the time and money, into the course. I just think it should be done differently.
Okay.
Is my answer, I think.
All right, let's get down to like the meat and potatoes. What do you think should be changed or removed or replaced from the CELTA course?
So this is such a good question, and something I've thought about a lot. I'm trying to think of how to sort of condense my thoughts into concrete ideas. So I think somehow the course should be made less intense for it to be feasible. Like I don't think it needs to be as hellish, for lack of a better word, as it is for a lot of people.
Is there a better word?
I know. And to be fair, like I know it sounds like we're just sort of knocking the CELTA course. It does provide a lot. Like I think for the right candidate, it is a super useful experience. It's incredibly hands-on, right? Like there are a lot of good things about it. It is really good training, but it's just so much intensity that I think it doesn't have to be that way. So I think one thing that a lot of trainers have thought about, and I think that we should think about, is potentially removing or changing the assignments. So in addition to teaching teaching 6 hours, sometimes it's 8 lessons, sometimes it's 9 lessons throughout the 4 weeks or 10 weeks, depending on your schedule. You also have to do 4 written assignments. And these are kind of like little research papers. There's background reading expected for at least a couple of them. And it's a lot. They're academic level papers. So for most candidates, trying to do that in addition to figuring out the lesson planning and the teaching is a lot. And I don't know how much the candidates really get out of them. One of them is essentially like you're designing a reading or listening lesson, which you teach several of those on the course. So I don't really know that doing that extra assignment is giving the candidates a ton more than they get just from teaching the actual lessons. And another one is like this giant language analysis. You're analyzing grammar and vocabulary. And I get how that's useful because it sort of opens candidates' eyes to, hey, you need to know this stuff if you want to teach it. And here are the things that you should think about. And like, here's sort of a push into doing some research about it. But again, because there's so little time, it just becomes this massive stressor instead of something that's actually a learning experience. And so I just feel like there's got to be a better way to help candidates, I don't know, maybe a workshop on like, if we need to know how to analyze these verb tenses, where do we look and how do we find that? And that something needs to be more guided about the assignments rather than just, here's this big scary thing, go and figure it out. So the assignments, I would say, is one big thing.
Yeah, I mean, do you know what? I only remember like 1 or 2 assignments. One was like a language analysis. The other one was it a case study? Did I have to do a case study? Which I
might have done a case study on some of the learners.
Yeah. And again, at that point, I'm not sure how useful it actually was.
Exactly.
Yeah, I think I would have been better off actually in the classroom, just with a class, because most teachers begin, or I'd say probably 99.9% of teachers begin in the classroom or in a classroom, and doing like a case study of one student, I don't know, I'm not sure how much I got out of it. So yeah, I think exactly. You're absolutely right there. There's going to be so many differing opinions on this, so for the people listening, but that's yes. I'm happy to hear them. Okay, so I'm going to make a suggestion. There's been a bit of a change in demographics. There are a lot more, for example, immigrants. There are a lot more asylum seekers and refugees. It might just be for want of a better word, trend. But I think that should be taken into consideration. And also, there's a massive sort of emphasis at the moment on exam preparation, especially the IELTS exam. Now, I don't know if there's any room for that sort of exam prep style something in CELTA. What do you think?
Yes, that would be another big thing that I've thought about changing. So I think, to sum up my opinion in a nutshell, and this is also, I'm sure, going to be controversial, I think that CELTA is kind of caught in this weird limbo between wanting to be practical and theoretical. And so this kind of brings me back to the assignments, that I think the reason for those assignments, the idea behind them, is that they want candidates to have this theory, right? Like they want you to be able to do research on linguistic key things, and they want you to be able to think about learning styles and like sort of theorize about your students. The problem with that is trying to cram it into such a small amount of time. There just isn't. And what candidates really need is the super practical stuff. For example, on the center that I trained for most of my career, there were 3 different input sessions on phonology, which they were interesting, but how much does that really help? Like when you get into the classroom, it's great that you know the phonemes and the names of these different features of connected speech, but like, how do you teach though? Right? Like when you get into the classroom, literally, what should you do first and then second and then third? And that's where I think some of that could be eliminated from CELTA because it's not Delta. It's not the level where candidates need a lot of the background theory. And if they want to learn that, the ones who really want that are like the pass A candidates who are going to find that out regardless. They're going to do the reading, they're going to do the extra research, right? The average candidate just needs to be told in very practical, sort of foolproof terms what to do. This works. This is what you should do. Never mind all the background behind it, right? Unless you're really interested.
Yeah.
And so that is where it gets into like, there should be more about how to teach different types of students, how to teach an exam prep class, how to work with immigrants, refugees, different learners, rather than so much of the theory, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, the whole learning styles thing. And again, guys, you might not agree with me. I kind of get the idea behind it, but in terms of practicality, what teacher is going to sit there and prepare for 5 different learning styles? Not going to happen. Not going to happen. I appreciate people do learn in different ways. You try and accommodate that. You give students choice, you know, in whatever way you can. But I just think it's a waste of time. And the other thing about phonemes, I think you're absolutely right about the pronunciation. I think like just some really, really simple concepts like, okay, contractions, intonation, emphasizing words like really and so, and just like super easy practical things that teachers can implement immediately. Because, you know, I come across teachers all the time and they don't do, or they actively avoid pronunciation because they just don't know what to do with it. But if you just give them a few really simple ideas, they've got something to start with and to work with immediately.
Exactly. And the how to, like where it comes, I think there needs to be more of like what's actually happening in the classroom between the teacher and student, not, you know, okay, this is elision versus this is assimilation. Like that's lovely, but that doesn't really help an average candidate understand, like, I am modeling and drilling pronunciation. Why? Like, how is that helping my student? What is my student getting out of it? And what am I trying to help them do? How do I correct them? You know, it's that practical stuff that I think needs more focus for sure.
Yeah. Let's focus on silent letters before we go into elision.
Right. Yeah. And then the average candidate too, they can't really weed through what it is that they're being told because it's helpful for them and what it is that they should be telling the student. Like I've heard trainees say things like, okay, students, like now we're going to read for gist because you need to get the main idea of this text. And this is important because it's like, okay, no, like, you know, the theory behind it, but you don't need to be telling the students all these sort of like meta language terms necessarily in that moment. I don't know.
No, I agree. I think the less technical or better language you use, the better. And I think that's a good rule across the board. Like, to be honest, even in discussions and things like that, I switch off immediately when I see discussions on LinkedIn or articles with too much meta language, because I have to really think about what it actually means. And I don't have the headspace for that.
Yeah. And that's not what CELTA is. Like, CELTA isn't a degree in linguistics.
No.
It's a hands-on teacher training course. And so I think it's helpful for that to be what's happening is, again, the candidates who really want the background, they'll find it. But for the average candidate, it's just not helpful. Yeah.
And going back to what you said about what's going on between teachers and students, I think one thing that's really missing, and I just think is more important than practically anything, is how do you build relationships with your students? How do you build community in the classroom? Because at the end of the day, if you don't have your students' trust, you're not going to get the most out of them.
Right. That's so true. There's not a lot about the human element of what's happening. And it was difficult. I remember that is one thing on my CELTA course. I've had trainees before ask me, you know, if you could go back and do your CELTA again, would you change anything? And my first answer is always, I would think about the students more. And I did well on my CELTA course. And as I said, for me, it wasn't a super stressful experience, but I was occupied enough trying to check all the boxes in my head of, what I need to do to have this be a good lesson, that I often didn't really think about the human experience that my students were having. And I wish I had the capacity to spend sort of more time, like getting to know, just like enjoying, like living in the moment of, wow, this person's from Argentina and this person's from Iran. And like, here we are together in the same space, having this shared experience. I didn't really start to feel that until I was into my own teaching career.
Yeah. It would be nice to have a little module in the CELTA that's like your first lesson with your students. How can you get to know them? How can they get to know each other? And how, in future lessons, how can you get them to share information with each other and sort of promote that kind of positive cooperative mindset in class? Because I think, like I said, I think that's more important than actually delivering your content, because that will directly influence how you deliver your content and how that content is received.
Right. Which obviously the content part is still extremely important, but without that foundation with your students, it's going to be difficult for you to connect with them.
Yeah. And I'm also very big on, students communicating with each other as well, and, providing students with the language to communicate with each other. I think that's a really important thing that needs to be raised as well, because it shouldn't just be student, teacher, teacher, student. That should not be the dynamic at all. And we're talking, it's a student-centered lesson, get them talking, blah, blah, blah. But like, how are they going to communicate when they don't have the language? Do they know how to ask each other, whether they're finished, or should they check together, or can they ask each other for help? All of this stuff, all of that kind of stuff is really important as well.
Right. And there isn't much of an emphasis on functional language. There is functional language that's included in the CELTA course, and most candidates teach at least one functional language lesson, but sometimes they don't. But I think that's something, from what I remember from my CELTA course and from the way the course schedule was sort of set for us when we were CELTA trainers at the center where I worked, there's a lot of focus on teaching receptive skills, reading and listening, and a lot less focus on teaching things like functional language and speaking fluency. And I think that would be really helpful as well. Like, that's getting into what's more practical for the students. And yes, I think there could be a lot more of that.
Yeah, I agree. Because it's very much like grammar, vocabulary, reading, listening, and like, it doesn't take into account that grammar and vocabulary are connected, lexical approach and all of that. Anybody who listens to me regularly knows I'm a big fan of the lexical approach. But like, in terms of functional language and phrases, and looking at language in terms of chunks of language rather than words or grammar, I think that should be the mindset of the teacher from the beginning. And why nowadays is this not being sort of put forward and promoted? I just don't understand it. Help me out here, Shannon.
I completely agree. I think grammar is important, right? So like, I do get a bit frustrated when I have trainees tell me that they don't want to learn grammar and they don't think they should have to, because for me, that's a little bit like a doctor saying they don't want to learn anatomy. You need to know the building blocks. Yes. You just do. If this is what you want to do, like, you have to do the work behind it. That being said, I think there's an overemphasis at times on teaching grammar lessons as opposed to functions lessons and speaking lessons. And I don't know why that is still persisting on the CELTA course, if it's just because like, this is how it's always been done and it would take too much work to overhaul it, or what.
Yeah. And grammar is very much taught in one way and one way only, PPP. Mm-hmm. And in reality, that's not how it works. Your students won't get the present perfect in a 1 hour lesson. They won't be able to produce it the next day correctly. So how do we go about reviewing and revising that? Or,
exactly.
So even if we're sticking with the PPP, let's talk about review, reuse, recycle. Let's talk about that as well. How can you bring those elements back into future lessons? I think that is really important, actually.
Yes. And that is something that I don't remember being covered at all on my CELTA course. There were definitely things that, as well as I felt like I did, and I came out of CELTA feeling pretty confident in the different lesson frameworks, and I know how to plan a lesson and all of that. I didn't know anything about teaching one-to-one. I didn't know anything about reviewing, recycling. I didn't know anything about exam prep. I was asked to teach exam prep in my first teaching job, and I basically said, "What's that?" I'd never heard of the IELTS test before.
Yeah, panic sets in.
Yeah. So there are definitely things missing. And now I think one of the big things missing is there's really not much about teaching online.
Yes.
Which is, 50% or more now of classes and teaching. That's where it is being done. And ironically, even the online CELTAs that I was training on didn't have an input session set aside for how to teach online. Everything was just, this is how it's done in general in the physical classroom, and I suppose you'll figure out how to make that work on Zoom.
Which we all did during the pandemic.
Right. But now we know, like, it's been a couple of years, like we have specific things that we can do, that we can teach. And there could be so much more about that for candidates who are hoping to be online teachers or planning to be online teachers.
Even just a couple of hours, here are the difference in dynamics, how you can make the use of breakout rooms, and are there some cool little tools to use like Jamboard? Let's play around with them. Even something like that would just be, and again, like, you have to know how to connect with your students if you're going to teach online as well.
Yep. Yeah, you really do. And you have to be able to read certain things about them and understand how to troubleshoot different things. And exactly.
Yeah. And, when things go wrong, what do you do? Because that, you always get problems with sound, with internet connection. And yes, it's a lot. It's a lot.
It is. We love it, but it's a lot.
I think also something missing. You said one-to-one, you said exam, you said teaching online, but also young learners, because like a lot of teachers, not all of them, but a lot of teachers, and myself included, my first job was going from the CELTA into a summer school setting with teenagers.
Oh, wow.
Didn't have a clue. And, a lot of language centres, if you work in a private language school, they cater for teenagers in the summer. Completely different dynamic. Let's have a session on that. Surely that would be useful.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's not something that's talked about a whole bunch. I skipped that because young learners isn't really my preferred niche. But for most teachers, they do go straight from CELTA to teaching young learners or teaching teens. And there's really not a lot about that.
Yeah, it wouldn't be my thing either, I have to say. But it's definitely a trial by fire. Is that the right expression?
I believe so. Yeah. I can only imagine.
Yeah.
What
about business English? Do you think that should be covered briefly?
I do think so. And it is something. So there is, on most CELTA courses, the first 3 weeks, let's say, out of the 4 are about how to teach in general. So teaching the different frameworks, things like, I don't know, modeling and drilling, grammar, those things. The last week does usually have at least a session on business English, exam prep, teaching young learners. So those sort of like other contexts, but it's really, really brief. And again, a lot of it felt more theoretical than practical. And a lot of it felt a bit obvious. Like, business learners are often at work during the lesson. Like, okay, yeah, figured. But yeah, I think, again, talking more about practical things, like what do business English learners really need? Most of what they need is probably not specific vocabulary related to their jobs, because if they didn't know that vocabulary, they probably wouldn't be able to do that job. But they do need things like functional language. They need to think about formality. They need to think about, reading between the lines, and what people really mean when they're being overly polite, or, those types of things aren't really covered, and I think should be.
I mean, it could be covered these things could be covered, like you say, in such a more practical way, with even just with tips. And, like, business English doesn't have to be dry. It still can be fun. You can still play games.
Exactly.
Just little things like that. I mean, because a lot of people, including myself, my initial, when anybody says, right, you're doing business English next week, I inwardly groan. But once I get in there, I'm fine, because I realize it is just an English class with a business twist. But there are just little things that I think should be said. Yeah. And like, young learners, let's have 10 or 20 tips of how to deal with them, or how they're different to adults. Let's look at the difference between them. How do they behave differently? What's their attention span? that kind of thing. It's not rocket science, I don't think.
And to be fair, sometimes that does happen. A lot of it depends on where you happen to do your CELTA and what that particular schedule looks like and what the trainers kind of give you and what experience they have. But it can be hit or miss, definitely.
Is there anything else you think is missing or should be included? Or
I think my final sort of thought about CELTA is just, I've been thinking about this a lot lately. I think the English language teaching industry is really changing. I think the pandemic revolutionized it in a way that we didn't really expect in a lot of ways. And I think the ability that teachers now have to teach online is really changing things in a big way, not just in the way that lessons can be taught, or the way that teachers and students can connect in various parts of the world. But I think this idea of, I like to call it TEFLpreneurship, is really possible. And that's something that CELTA doesn't talk about at all. So I think in an odd way, and I hope I don't get in trouble for saying this, but in an odd way, I feel like CELTA is a bit outdated now in that it's still excellent, high quality training, right? Like the trainers know what they're talking about. I'm not saying by any means that it's a bad course or that it's not useful or that you won't leave with really helpful, applicable teaching skills. What I am saying is that I don't know that for every person it's necessary anymore. I think CELTA sort of was born in this era where, backpackers were traveling all over the world and there needed to be some kind of agreed upon standard. Like, how do we know that this person actually knows how to teach versus, this person just stumbled over from the hostel and they happen to be a native English speaker, so let's throw them in the classroom. Like, there needed to be something that could make that distinction. And I think CELTA sort of rose to the challenge of being the standard. And it was worldwide and, very well organized. And it had these international standards that were regulated and checked up on. And so that was really good when it was necessary. And when you needed that piece of paper and when you needed to apply to a language school and have that proof, it was really necessary. Now, I think some people are still in that position. And so CELTA is still really relevant, but so many other people are saying, like, I want to start my own thing. Like, I want to teach students one-to-one online. I want to create my own classes, thinking that they have to get a CELTA, and they don't learn how to do any of that and how to set up how to design their own courses, how to market their teaching skills to students. They learn how to teach in person and what to say in an interview to get a teaching job from a company, right? So I guess what I'm saying is just, if you're a teacher out there, think about what you actually need. And CELTA used to be the no-brainer answer, but it's not necessarily anymore.
I think that's a really interesting point. I totally agree. It just needs an overhaul. It needs just to catch up with what's happening in the world. And your comment about like people backpacking and getting a quality, it's so true. And I think because of that, a lot of EFL teachers don't get taken seriously, and it's probably the reason why the industry is so unstable and badly regulated. But there are also a lot of teachers who work long term at language schools, like myself, and a lot of teachers, I'm going to imagine, feel a bit stuck. And the fact that they don't know about TEFLpreneurship, and I think it's a disadvantage. Because I think a lot of teachers don't realize what they have. They don't realize how talented they are and how knowledgeable they are and how they could actually go freelance. I'm not saying it's easy. Of course it's not. You've done it. I'm trying to do it. It's taking a long time, but it is a process. But there needs to be that option for teachers as well, I think. Definitely. Yeah. Really good point. Really good point. Okay. So where can people find you, Shannon, if they want to connect with you?
Yes. So TEFLhorizons.com is the main website. That's where I live. So you can find all the resources there. I offer a couple of training courses specifically for teachers. So I do one called Online English Teacher, which is for teachers who want to learn how to teach online. There's an online live teaching practicum as well. So you can find that at TEFLhorizons.com/online English teacher. And then I do run a program. It's essentially like business coaching for teachers called Online TEFLpreneur. So you'll find that, you'll stumble upon it at TEFL Horizons as well. But there are a bunch of free resources also. I do pretty regular free webinars. I have a podcast as well, which Erin, hopefully you'll be joining me on my podcast very soon.
Oh, I'd love to.
And on Instagram, I'm TEFL_Horizons, and you can find me on Facebook, TEFL Horizons as well.
Okay, and I'll put all of those links in the show notes. And in the meantime, Shannon, thank you so much. That's it, guys. I really hope you got something out of this episode. As always, send me a message or comment on the episode post on my social media. If you haven't already subscribed to Everything EFL, I ask you once again, what are you doing? Hit that subscribe button. Also, talk me up to your colleagues, share any of my posts or my stories on social media. Do anything you can to spread the word of mouth about Everything EFL. And in the meantime, look after yourselves, have a peaceful week, and share the love. Bye.